Hi, I'm Sam, and this is Maurice. We're both leads on I'm on the Sheets team. I led the creation of the Sheets v4 API, and Maurice led the Slides API. And we're here to talk to you today about using Google Apps Script and the G Suite editors to make your life easier, automate internal processes, and really just make things simpler and better for you. So we're going to walk through some demos today. I'm going to give sort of an appetizer demo and then a longer run-through of a process that an HR person might use to hire people. And I'll let Maurice talk about his demo when it comes to him. And our goal today is really to show you how you can use AppScript and spend less money getting the stuff you need to do done. Companies spend billions of dollars a year automating their workflows. And that's not even mentioning the time they spend figuring out how to do it. They have to contact people to build it and work through everything in order to get it all done. With AppScript, we can take a lot of the pain away. These are some stories of some customers that have used AppScript to make their life better. My most favorite one by far is the very last one, where a company simplified a horrible revision merge nightmare of taking all these different files, merging them together, and then creating some kind of output. And they simplified their lives by using G Suite to automate it, generating a PDF at the end. And what previously took about 40 hours a month now takes under 3, and saves them, they estimated, over $100,000 a year. And a customer literally said, this is an actual quote, "Finally, I can take a vacation." So our goal here is for you to be able to take a vacation from automating all of these workflows. So here's a simple example. Everyone likes parties, right? So imagine that you're throwing an office party, and you want to send out RSVPs. You want to analyze who responds to it, what parts of the company they're from. Are they from sales? Are they from engineering? Book a venue based on the results. Do you have enough people that can fit in one? Do you need to split it up into multiple venues? What kinds of places do people like to go to? Traditionally, this would be a lot of manual labor. You'd have to pore through all the results, figure out how many people there are, where they belong in the company, maybe what office they're from, where you can host things. Or instead of doing that, you'd purchase some turnkey solution, which would cost a lot of money. But realistically, office parties aren't all that important. So you'd probably just have some poor person doing the most minimal thing possible and throwing a rather generic party. With AppScript and Docs editors, things are pretty easy. You can create a Google form, collect usernames when sending out the form, get all your results back, and associate the form with a sheet. In Forms itself, you can analyze all the responses. You can see 66% of the people said, yes, they're in. 33% said, no, they're not. And in Sheets, it'll sync right back up into Sheets, and you can look and do sort of analysis in Sheets if you want to do it in a slightly manual way, maybe using Sheets Explorer or asking questions of it. But you can also create an app script associated with the sheet in order to do things for you. So here's a pretty 20-line example of how you could create a very straightforward app script that looks at all of your data in the sheet and figures out who's in sales, who's in engineering. So I'll go through each line and sort of explain what's happening here. So at the top, we use the Groups app, and we get the eng@mycompany.org and the sales@mycompany.org groups. And then we get the active spreadsheet, because the script is associated with a spreadsheet. And we get the data from that spreadsheet up until the last row of data. And we start the engineering and sales counts at 0, and then loop through all of our data. And we say, is this user in engineering, by asking, is the end group, does this end group have this user's email address? If not, are they in the sales group? Does it have that user's email address? And we just increment the sales and the engineering variables by 1. And then at the very end, after we've collected all of that, we go back to the spreadsheet and we get the sheet name with results. And we get a range where we want to put the data in. And we say, this is how many people were eng. This is how many people were in sales. And so this is a very sort of straightforward example of how you can use AppScript, just analyzing your data in Sheets automatically, associating it with groups, and putting your data back in the sheet. So all of this code is JavaScript. It's all stored in the cloud with revision history, so if you make a mistake, you can go back in time and fix it. And it's hosted and run in the cloud too, so you don't have to spin up any jobs, have maintenance, deal with having all of your servers running, seeing if anything goes wrong with them. And it's all secure, and it comes with G Suite. But automating parties isn't what brought you here. Businesses have a lot more critical tasks, like hiring people. There are a lot of steps to hiring someone. You have to send offer letters, you have to collect employee information, you have to have them sign NDAs and verify their employment history, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to walk through a demo of how you could automate the process of hiring someone, if you can switch to the demo machine. So here's a spreadsheet, and I filled it in with some basic examples here of employee name, salary, manager name, the team, and whether or not an offer letter was sent, the offer letter URL, if they signed an NDA, and so on and so forth. There's an extra column in here for their email address, which I've kept hidden, because I'm going to, right now, actually make this sort of an interactive demo. And if you'd like to, you can see that there's a URL here, goo.gl, capital PD, W, capital E, Q, T. And if you want, you can go to this place and fill it out. Just remember, it's all being recorded, and you can fill out a fake name if you want to go into the employee tracking thing. So the idea here is that, let's say there is an HR manager, and they have this spreadsheet with their data and a form for new hires. And they want to send this out to hiring managers and say, is there anyone that you want to hire? If so, fill out their email address, their name, their salary, their manager name. You can look what the form looks like from the manager's perspective, and it's just here. You see a little form where they can type the stuff in and submit the results. All the results go to Google Forms, and the form is synced up with the spreadsheet. So the results come into the spreadsheet. At this point, you can click on this workflows, which is this custom menu item that we added with AppScript, and click Send New Offer Letters. What that's going to do is iterate through the spreadsheet, similar to how we did the party example, and create a customized Google Doc for the employee of their offer letter, and then email it to them with the link to their customized Google Doc. Afterwards, it'll mail that to the employee, and the employee will basically see in their email the link to their doc and be able to click on it. And so I'll show you what that looks like. So here's one user. It says, "You're hired. Dear John Doe, congratulations, you're hired. Please view your offer letter, which includes the next steps at this URL." You open the URL, and you see this customized Google Doc for John Doe. And it has their salary, their name. The title is specific for John Doe. And it has, to continue the process, please fill out this NDA. So we click on this link. This NDA is hosted by AppScript. AppScript is acting as a web app in this scenario. And here's where it goes to. It says, here's an NDA. Click here to sign it. When you sign it, it comes back and says, thanks for signing the NDA. And that was also hosted by AppScript. And you can see that the AppScript then filled in that, yes, the NDA was signed by John Doe, and none of the others yet have filled it out. And if, for example, I see some new people filled out the workflow or the form, so if you click Send New Offer Letters again, it'll figure out who hasn't had an offer letter sent and send new offer letters to each of these people and update with the yes and the customized Google Doc for each of them. So I'm going to walk through the code that makes this possible. So there's a script editor associated with every sheet. And when you open up the script editor, you see the code which runs it all. And there's a bunch of functions in here: add menu items, send new offer letters, and I'll walk through each one in turn. So add menu items is the first one. And this is how the workflows menu item got added into your spreadsheet. Every Google Doc, or I'm sorry, every app script has this current project triggers. You can edit triggers with your app script. And here I'm saying when I want to run the add menu items function, when there's an event from a spreadsheet on open. So whenever anyone opens the spreadsheet, it will run this arbitrary function that I made and run this code. And what this code is saying is, give me the UI, this spreadsheet app UI, and create a menu in the UI, the workflows menu. And in that workflows menu, I want to add an item whose text is send new offer letters, And when someone clicks send new offer letters, it will run this function, send new offer letters. And then I want to add it to the UI. So send new offer letters, what does that do? In send new offer letters, we get the active spreadsheet. Because this sheet is run from, or this script is run from a spreadsheet, when they clicked the button in the UI, there's an associated spreadsheet, and you can get it, and then pop up in that spreadsheet a toast saying sending offer letters. Then we get the active sheet, which is the employee tracking sheet, and the last row, which is the last row of data in the spreadsheet. We get the range of all of the data that we care about, the start row from the start row and column to the number of rows, which is the last row minus 1, and the number of columns with the data we care about. Then we get the display values of each of these things, which is how they're presented in the UI itself. Then we iterate through each of the bits of data and get the data for each row. The row number, the name, the email, salary, manager, team, whether or not the offer was sent. And if the offer sent is not yes, which is how I was able to click it again and only send new offer letters, if they haven't said yes that an offer was sent, then we create an offer letter, and I'll go through that function in a moment. So after we create the offer letter, it gives us the ID of what document was created for the offer letter, and we create this URL, docs.google.com, document, offer ID, and then a message that we're going to email. Dear so-and-so, congratulations, you're hired. Please view your offer letter, which includes the next steps at your offer URL, sincerely HR. It's a very customized message. So then we use Mail App, which is one of the other apps that's sort of built into AppScript. There's many that exist, and Maurice is going to go through a few more. But Mail App is one that you can just send mail. So you say Mail App, send email with the message. The email is the user's email address, the subject of you're hired, the message, and just a little token saying we don't want people to reply to this. And then we get the range in the spreadsheet saying, yes, we did send an offer, and here's the URL of your customized offer letter. We increment the amount of letters we sent, flush all of the changes out to the spreadsheet so it puts it in the spreadsheet, and then pop up a toast saying either you sent this many letters or you didn't send any at all because there was no new letters to send. So how did we create the offer letter? So we have a customized Google Doc, which is the template of the offer letter. And in this template, we basically see, welcome to the next demo company, hello, name, we're thrilled to offer you a job, your starting salary will be salary. Just basically a spreadsheet, or I'm sorry, a doc with tokens that we're going to replace with customization. So in the script, using our Drive app this time, we get the file of the ID with the ID of our template, and then make a copy of it. On the copy, we then change the sharing, and we say, this copy can be visible to anyone who has the link, but all they can do is view it. And then we change the name of that file to say offer letter for so-and-so. Then we use Document App, which is the hook into Google Docs within AppScript. And we get the doc by Document App and get the body of the document, and then just do a bunch of replacements. We say, for your name, put the person's name, for their salary, put the person's salary, manager, team. For the NDA, it's a little more complex because we want to do text and a URL. So we get the starting point of where we want to replace text and generate a URL, and then say on this portion within the document, set the URL to this NDA URL using this other function that I'll go through in a moment, generate NDA URL. And then we return the offer file's ID so that the email that we generated can link to it. So how do we generate the NDA URL? Because if you remember, that was served, I mentioned, by AppScript hosting as a web app in this scenario. So generate NDA URL uses this script app, yet another thing that's associated with AppScript, which is the script itself as a service. And you can get the URL of the script app as a web app and return this saying this is the URL, and then append some parameters to it saying here's your name, here's your email address, and here's your row. And you notice I use this encode URI component, which is just part of JavaScript because this is a JavaScript environment, so you can just call JavaScript functions and make them work. And there's various other bits in generate NDA URL, such as whether or not they're actually signing it or just viewing the NDA. So how do you get AppScript to act as a web app? It's pretty simple. You publish it by clicking this Publish button, deploy as web app, and then here you see, do you want to deploy it as a web app? And it gives you the URL. and gives you some information of the version, who it's going to execute as, who can access the app. And in order to serve it, you just create a function called doGet. And AppScript will automatically run this function when someone hits the HTTP request at that URL. And we can get parameters from it, such as the URL parameters. We get the name, the email parameter, the row parameter, and the signed parameter. And we just do some basic validation here, saying whether or not, if the request didn't have any of these fields, we say, sorry, we couldn't verify your employment. But if they did have those fields, then we want to hook into the spreadsheet a bit more. So if you remember back at the top of the example, we use spreadsheet app get active spreadsheet, because the spreadsheet was associated with the script, since you were running the script from the spreadsheet. In this scenario, you're not running the script from the spreadsheet, so you can't say get active spreadsheet, but you can just load an arbitrary spreadsheet with that spreadsheet ID. And then we say, give me the sheet by name of the employee tracking sheet, and we get the row that the employee said that they were at from the URL. So in this scenario here, we're not using great security, because we just put an arbitrary name, an arbitrary row, and someone could theoretically change their row number and just troll through and try to figure out who you're hiring, what row they're on. In a better example, you could imagine that you could generate a random number, put that random number in your spreadsheet, put it in the URL, and all of those things have to match up. But for demo purposes, this is a little more straightforward and easier to walk through. But so here we get the values of the data in that range and verify that the name they gave us in the URL matches the name in the spreadsheet at that row. And if it doesn't, we say, sorry, we couldn't verify things. If they've already signed the NDA, then we just say, you've already signed it, no more to do. But if they haven't signed it, and this is the request to do the signing, you said click here to sign it, and they clicked it to sign it, then we update the spreadsheet. We get the row, the column that is the signing, and say, yes, you signed it. And you can see back in the employment that, yes, they're signed, and some other people have signed it. And we spit back some HTML saying, thanks for signing the NDA. If this is not the signing, if this is serving of the NDA, then we generate a URL for actually signing it and create some HTML output saying, here's an NDA, click here to verify it. And that's it. It's less than 200 lines. It's about 167 lines, and a full workflow of how you can automate with forms, sheets, docs, create templates, customize things, serve AppScript as a web app, and do all of these things that make life a lot simpler and easier using AppScript. And if you can go back to the presentation, please. And that's it for me. Maurice is going to continue for the rest of it for his demo. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. All right. So another common process we hear a lot about is reporting. So this is a sales rep named Jane, and it's time for the end of the quarter is approaching, and it's time for her to prep her quarterly business review. So she needs to load up the data on all her accounts. She wants to get it into Sheets. She needs to do some analysis, and then finally package it together into a nice presentation she can give to her team and to her leadership. Now, without any kind of automation, this would be really tedious. She'd have to dig up the data. She'd have to find the presentation she used last time. She would have to copy-paste the data from her new data onto the old slides. And it's really tedious. You can make mistakes. You can copy-paste the wrong numbers. And at the end of the day, it can look really bad if you make a mistake. These mistakes are not easy to catch. So using AppScript and the G Suite REST APIs, we can make this process a lot easier. We have a Google Sheets REST API that was designed to make it really easy to import data from external data sources or third-party systems into Google Sheets. Last fall, we also launched our first ever API for Google Slides. So you can take the data in Sheets or another third-party system and make a nice-looking slide presentation with some simple code. So let's walk through how we can use these REST APIs together to make Jane's job a lot easier. All right, so the first step is to get the raw data into Google Sheets. Once it's there, Jane can use the great analysis features of Sheets, such as Explore or all the functions that are come built in, to understand the data, figure out what trends she wants to highlight, and visualize it in a good-looking chart, for example. So how do we get the data there? Several large enterprise partners have already integrated with the Sheets API. And if you use some of these tools, you can take advantage of that and get the data into Sheets very easily. So earlier in the conference, for example, we announced that Salesforce launched a new Sheets integration where you can import your opportunities from Salesforce straight into Sheets and update into Sheets, and it'll sync back and forth between Salesforce and Sheets. So if you're a Salesforce user, you can use that and get your data into Sheets very easily. So let's say that's not the case. Let's say you have you have some data in an internal service, an on-premises database, something where you kind of are on your own. Thankfully, these APIs are pretty easy to work with. You can write a quick program using the Sheets API and take that data from your on-prem database and put it directly into Sheets. So let's take a look at what this code, how this code works. Can we switch to the demo, please? All right. So here you are. This is a Python script I wrote. I won't go through all of it in detail. The bulk of it I copied from the Google Sheets API Python Quick Start. And it has all of this boilerplate code in the beginning that takes care of initializing the client libraries, going through auth authentication, and making sure that the user gives consent for this app to edit their spreadsheets. So this is boilerplate you can get from our developer website. I won't talk about the bulk of that. So here is the core of our script. So the first thing we do is we have to get the data that we want to put into Sheets. And here I have a simple SQLite database that's running on my laptop. I have two tables, customers and orders, and I'm using some SQL to join them together and get the data out that I need. So SQLite works great for a demo, but this could be anything. This could be a big data warehouse. This could be an on-prem Oracle database. This could be an internal ordering service that you need to call over HTTP. This could really be anything. Just plug it into with whatever you need to get the data from. So now let's go to the Sheet-specific parts of the script. So in this main method, I call this load data function that gets the data from the database. I add a header row to the data we get so that it's easier for a human to work with afterwards. And then I start calling the Sheets API. So the first thing I do is I call the Spreadsheets create method, which creates an empty spreadsheet in Google Sheets. Here I'm giving it the title imported from DB on date so that it's easy to pick out from your drive later. And then after that, I take the data that we got from the database and turn it into the requests that we eventually need to send to Sheets to get the data there. So I do that with the Spreadsheets value update function. And for that, I give it the spreadsheet ID, where in the spreadsheet I want this data to end up. So the range A1, just the top left beginning of the spreadsheet. I tell Sheets that I wanted to treat this data as user entered, so it'll automatically it'll behave as if you type this data by hand. So it'll understand that the things that look like dates are dates, the things that look like numbers are numbers, and again, we'll make this sheet easier to work with at the end. I also tell Sheets that my data is formatted in rows. Just because we read this from a SQL database, it's naturally in rows. It's easier to import. But if your data happens to be shaped in columns, you can say columns here, and Sheets will do the right thing. So in a pretty quick script, I think I have like 30 lines of actual Sheets code. We can get data from any data source practically that the script can talk to onto Google Sheets. So let's give that a quick run. So it's just a Python script. I hit enter, and there we are. So it outputted the URL of the spreadsheet. I can load here. And I can open it up, and here's the data from the database. So I have the customers, the name of each customer, and each row is an order that customer placed. So how many items in their order, the total dollar amounts, and what date the order was placed on. So based on this, Jane can get started. She can do some analysis, use some functions, and kind of get her work done. All right, back to the slides. OK, so the data is in Sheets, and Jane can get to work doing the analysis. So the next step is to make this into a good-looking presentation she can give her team. So for this, we'll use the Google Slides API, and we'll call it from AppScript so she can work with the spreadsheet she's working on and with the slides at the same time. So using those things together, in a few clicks, we can get a good-looking presentation. So back to the demo, please. All right, great. So let's say Jane did her analysis, and this is what she came up with. She has a pivot table with the top 15 customers she works with, and their sales per quarter for the past year, sorted by their Q4 sales. She also has a chart that's a little squished on the display, but demonstrates how the sales per customer has changed throughout the year, and some other configuration data that we need to get the slides ready. So, what year we care about, what quarter, her name, things that aren't necessarily in the data, but end up in the final presentation. So there are a couple ways you can trigger app scripts from Google Sheets. Earlier, Sam showed you that we can add a custom menu item where you could go to the menu, click, and it'll run an app script function for you. Here, I created a button because I think big buttons are fun to push. So if we click Generate Slides, now this is running my script and taking the data from the spreadsheet, combining it with a template that we created, and in a few moments, we'll have a nice finished slide deck. All right, so here's the link to the presentation that we created. And this is what we end up with. All right, so this is a simple quarterly business review presentation. It has the title slide with the quarter we're reporting on, the year. It has Jane's name. We have an executive summary slide that has the chart we came up with. It has the total revenue for the quarter, how much we grew compared to our goal. We have a table describing the top 5 customers and their quarter 4 sales. We have a slide with the big ambitious goal to grow 12% next quarter. And finally, we have another slide that has a link to the spreadsheet so that if you send this presentation around, the people looking at it can dive into the same data that you worked on and either learn more about it or double check your work. Okay, so let's walk through what the code that powers that big button. So there's a lot that goes into creating a slide presentation. So like, for example, here we had to, we kind of chose a theme. We have to make sure the colors are on brand. Sometimes you want to use some custom logos. So instead of writing code to define all these things, it tends to be a lot easier to work with the template presentation. So this is the template that we used for this example. It has the 5 slides we'll end up with at the end. And we're using some variables in curly braces that will use some replacements to get the data from the sheet and into the presentation. So here we have the quarter label, the year, the name. On the executive summary, we have the little variables for the total sales, the direction, and we have a rectangle that we'll use to replace the chart into that spot. We have the table that at the end has the top 5 customers. We have the slide for our goal, and we have a slide that we'll use to link to the source data. So if you notice, the variables already have styling on them. So instead of having to specify all the styles by hand in code, you can make your slides pretty close to what they'll end up looking like at the end. You put the styling on the variables, and the Slides API will keep that styling when you do the replacements. OK, so let's look at the code that creates the slides. So the bulk of the work happens in this export to slides function. This is the function that I'm calling when you click the big button on the spreadsheet. And the first thing we do is tell the user, hey, we're working on it. We set some text on the ranges, and we flush the changes out to the spreadsheet so that users know that we're making progress. The next thing we do is that we grab the data out of the spreadsheet that we need. Sam kind of went through how this works. You basically use Spreadsheet app to pick out ranges, and you can get the displayable values out of those ranges. So I'm not going to cover that in detail since we've already kind of seen it. The next step is that we use the Drive app. That's one of the built-in libraries inside of AppScript, and that represents your Google Drive. So we have the ID of this template. This is the ID from the URL. And we have it coded into our script. So we tell Drive app, get me this file, make me a copy, please give it this title. So we made a copy of the template, and then we'll use the Slides API to modify that template to produce the final presentation. All right, so how do we talk to slides from AppScript? So here we're going to use what's called the Slides Advanced Service. So an advanced service is a thin wrapper around a Google REST API that's available through AppScript. There's a pretty large list of advanced Google services. You can go to Resources, Google Advanced Services, and here's kind of the big list of the ones that are available. You see I have the Slides API, and it's turned on. And a lot of these things it's kind of a lower level API. You get kind of the full power of the REST API. So it ends up looking a little different than the built-ins, like Spreadsheet app, for example, that was simpler. But here you get a lot more power. Oh, I should mention that the Slides Advanced Service launched on Tuesday. I actually turned it on while I was on the flight over here from New York. All right. So let's get to the slide-specific parts of this. So the Slides REST API works using a batch update model. You basically assemble a list of requests, and you tell Slides, please do this, please do that, please do that. You send the big batch over the Slides API, and all those requests get executed in order in an atomic fashion. So the rest of the script basically goes through all the things that we want to do to the presentation. We assemble this big list in Slides requests, which is just a JavaScript array. And then we call the presentation's batch update method to actually execute those changes. So I'll go through what the steps are in a little detail. So the first thing we do is that we call this replace all text method. So earlier we took the data out of the spreadsheet and we added it to this data object. It's just a key value of the things we want to replace in the template with the data we want to replace it with. So the request for that looks pretty simple. You know, we look at all the keys in the data map. We create a little object that's the replace all text request. We say, Slides, please take all of the text that matches text and replace it with this replace text. So this will go through all of your slides and put the data in for all those variables we had in the template. The next thing we do is that we call this replace shape with chart API. So if you remember in the template, we had a big rectangle on the second slide that had the text YTD chart. And we'll use that as the location of where the chart will end up. So instead of having to mess with, I want the slide to be here and have to nudge it a little while, instead of messing with the chart and saying I want this chart to be here and like fidgeting with where to position it, you can put a shape in your template and then you can position it where you want, you can see it in context, and you use replace shape with chart to actually put the chart in that place. So the request for that is pretty simple. You say I want to replace the shape that contains this text, which is just YTD chart in our case. We tell it the spreadsheet to grab the chart from, which is just the active spreadsheet that the script is being run from. We give it the ID of the chart, and we tell it we want this chart to be linked. So what I mean by linked is that Slides will remember that this chart came from this spreadsheet, so that if the underlying data in spreadsheets changes, there'll be an update button in Slides that you can click, and it'll refresh the chart automatically. So that way your data is always up to date. There's also an API on the Slides API to call refresh on a chart for you. So if you're working with both the Sheets API and the Slides API, you can change some data in Sheets and then tell Slides, hey, there's a new chart. Please pick it up. So the final thing we do is that we add a link from the last slide. We add a link to the source data so people can take a look at the underlying data that went into the presentation. So the first APIs that we worked with, they worked kind of like in a find and replace manner. So we just kind of gave them the text in a shape, and the API kind of found it and did the right thing. Some of our other APIs are object ID based. So I have to give slides the ID of the object that contains the text that we want to add a link to. So to do that, we call the presentations get API right here, and we fetch the presentation from slides. We pick out the final slide, and then we iterate through all the elements on that slide. So we know that slide, we created it. It's a title and body slide, so it has two shapes on it, a box for the title and a box for the body. And I iterate through the two shapes on there, and I find the one that is the body placeholder. So we know that's the one that has the text that we want to linkify. So we pass the object ID of that shape into this update link function. All right, so update link is a function that updates the text style of that box to add a link style to it. So we do links and slides are text styles. If you wanted to do other text style changes, like you want to make the font different, or you want to make it bold or italics, you would do it in a much similar way using update text style. OK, so that's all the requests that we needed to make the slides look the way we want. So we replaced all of our variables, we added the chart, and then we added the link to the source data. So finally, we call batch update. And then we tell the user, we generated your slides, here's when we did it, and we add the URL to the presentation back to the sheet. So in all, it's probably 174 lines of code, including the sheet stuff I didn't cover. But with that, we created a good-looking presentation using the data in the spreadsheet using AppScript. Back to the slides, please. All right. So using these APIs in G Suite, Jane saved several hours of her time. She avoided having to do all this manual copy-paste, and now she's ready to give this presentation to leadership. So with all that saved time, she could get to work meeting her next quarter goals, or she could go outside and enjoy the sunshine a little bit. So we broke up the steps here to kind of demonstrate what your options are. But really, you could automate this a lot further. So for example, you could have the import to sheet script run automatically every quarter. You can have it. You can say, like, once the data is there, you can send an email to Jane saying, like, hey, your data is ready. Please go take a look and get started. You could, if you wanted to, you could skip sheets altogether and have your program that queries the database do the analysis for you, and then it goes straight to slides, because slides is also a REST API that you can call from a third-party tool. So in summary, with some creativity and just kind of looking around, I think you can find a lot of workflows in your enterprise that can be automated with AppScript and the G Suite APIs, similar to the ones we've seen today. And these are small automations. These are things that you can write in an afternoon. You can write it in a couple of days. But even though they're small, you can, the savings kind of add up. If you do the same thing for every hiring manager, for every party organizer, for every sales rep in your company, the dollar savings just multiply, and overall can make a big impact. So the demos we did show you, they do require some coding. It's pretty simple. It's just, most of it is just JavaScript. We showed some Python code today. It was also pretty simple to write, and those libraries are available in pretty much any major language. So it does require some coding. It's simple. It's within the reach of power users and IT professionals, but it's not for everybody yet. So if you're looking for a low-code way to do these kind of automations, there's a G Suite product called AppMaker that's currently in early access. And that provides a drag-and-drop UI that lets you create apps without really doing much code. So if you're interested in that, you can request access to AppMaker at developers.google.com/appmaker. And they also have a showcase space at Moscone through the end of the conference. If you find them, you can learn a lot more about how that works. So another good resource for learning about these automations is the Transformation Gallery. It's a gallery that lists several real-world use cases of the G Suite APIs, and not even just the APIs, but just the applications themselves, and how you can use them together to kind of transform your business. So a lot of them come with customer stories, and so you can see what the real business impact was of deploying these integrations in real life. You can check it out at transformationgallery.withgoogle.com. All right, so wrapping up, AppScript is a lightweight tool that lets power users and IT professionals write simple JavaScript to automate actions on top of many Google services. So today we showed you how to script with Docs, with Slides, with Sheets, with Gmail, with Drive. But AppScript supports many other Google services that we didn't cover today. So for example, there's a library for Calendar, for Translate, for YouTube, for Maps, and there's also that list of advanced services that give you more powerful interfaces that are easy to use to call Google REST APIs. So in general, it's easy to learn, it runs in the cloud, and it's available to you as part of your G Suite subscription. It is part of the glue that helps make G Suite into a true suite of apps that work together. So there are also REST APIs for Sheets and Slides that make integration with third-party data sources easy. So they provide simple ways to get your data into G Suite, where you can collaborate on it, you can script it using AppScript, or you can present it to others. So using AppScript and our REST APIs, you can automate many of the tedious processes in your business, save time and money, and let folks focus on creating value instead of busy work. All right, so to learn more about the things we covered today, you can check out our developer websites for AppScript, Sheets, and Slides. The URLs are on this screen right now. There's a lot of documentation available, and there are plenty of samples to help you get started.